Hi, everyone, and welcome to our series, Coping with Crisis. And we're in the series, the sub-series, Dealing with Hurt. And this is going to be part 5 of Dealing with Hurt. And we're going to continue on in this series until we finish it all up and figure out how to solve the problem of the hurt and the pain that we have in our lives, how to heal that, how to forgive, how to move on from our grievance story, how to give that grievance story up. So today we're going to continue in this series, and so this is part 5. If you haven't caught part 1 through 4, I recommend that you go back, start from the beginning, and work your way to this point. But anyway, let's continue on in dealing with the hurt and the pain that we have encountered in this life. I'm going to do a little bit of review because we haven't talked about this in a while. But we have talked about that there is a difference between a grievance story that someone creates for themselves and a difference between telling others that we were hurt. And just to refresh our minds, a grievance story is one in which you tell over and over again to your friends and family members or whoever you meet about the pain that you have suffered and dealt with in your life. And it just continues to be this ongoing narrative that you keep repeating to people. Well, anyway, we've talked about that grievance stories that we create in ourselves. They don't have balance in them because they're typically all taken personally when some people do things to us. We don't bring in the impersonal into the situation to where we don't even consider whether this person knew what they were doing, how mature they were, how, selfish they were being. In fact, a lot of times people do things to us and they had no intentions of trying to hurt us. And so grievance stories don't bring in the impersonal. They're always 100% personal, that this person meant to do this to me and ruined my life, that kind of mentality. And a grievance story doesn't allow one to take responsibility for what happened. They're always the victim. And they are not responsible for rehabbing themselves and getting past the hurt and the pain. They don't ever look at how they contributed to the problem. And yes, other times, there are times when we don't contribute to the problem, so someone out of the blue just does something bad to us. But in other cases, like say for instance in a marriage or some type of relationship, we all contribute to the problem. The side might be weighted heavily on one side, but then we have to ask ourselves, was there any amount of this that I contributed to this problem of this person hurting me? Well, in a grievance story, it's always 100% and never the victim, right? And so that's part of a grievance story. And unfortunately, these grievance stories that we create for ourselves, we remain the perpetual victim, and we have to tell the story to everybody. And it allows the person not to forgive. And that's the big thing biblically of why people can't forgive, is because they have a grievance story, and it doesn't allow them to forgive. And we're going to talk about forgiveness later on, but that's the problem of starting a grievance story when we are hurt or someone inflicted pain on us. And if you remember last time, we did kind of a diagnostic with our lives of whether or not we have a grievance story. And just briefly to go over this, we asked several questions of, have you told your story more than twice to the same person? Do you keep replaying the events that happened to you in your head? Do you actually speak to the person who hurt you even when the person was not there? Have you said to yourself that you will tell your story without getting upset and then found yourself in an emotional breakdown? Or you got physically agitated? Is the person who hurt you the villain of your story and you're the victim, right? So when you tell your grievance story, does it remind you of other painful things that have happened to you in your life? Does the story, the grievance story, focus primarily on your pain and what you have lost? Have you ever said that you will never tell your story again, but you keep doing it? So those are the diagnostic questions we talked about, and that's just to refresh our minds about whether or not we have a grievance story. And those questions really indicate whether or not we do. So the question then becomes, how do we get rid of these grievance stories? How do we get rid of these grievances so we can forgive, so we can heal, so we can move on? Well, we kind of went over some of these principles in the earlier broadcasts in sessions 1 through 4. And again, I just want to enumerate them real quick before we move on. First, we have to understand that they have been ingrained in us. This is a narrative we've carried all of our lives, and it will be a process to get them out of us. So you have to allow yourself some time. It is why we get triggered in these areas, because of this grievance story. That's why certain things will set us off, and a minor infraction that someone does against us turns into a nuclear reaction. And it's because we're getting triggered in that grievance area. And again, why do we do this? As far as being triggered, why does that happen so often to us? Well, it's because of how our brain works alongside these narratives. See, our brain or our mind files things in filing cabinets, if you want to think in those terms. And the brain has all these filing cabinets, and it puts information in these filing cabinets, so to speak. And so these file cabinets and these folders are labeled, so to speak. And so what happens is when something happens currently to us, our brain looks to associate what's happening with a memory so that we can make sense of what's really going on. And what the brain will do is, let's say someone snubs us or something like that or whatever, and we feel abandoned or something like that because of the snub or whatever. Instantly, your brain will go to that file cabinet of where the grievance snub is, the abandonment snub or whatever you want to call it, whatever that file's name is, and it will access that file and bring all those memories back, and you will feel the emotions that you felt long ago. It brings everything back. So a minor infraction then sends us to the nth degree, and we call that being triggered. But it's really how our mind works, and it indicates to us that because we can get triggered so easily, that we're so emotionally fragile with the way we deal with people, it indicates that we have major grievances that are unresolved in us, that haven't been dealt with, that haven't been healed, that haven't been let go. And definitely forgiveness has not happened. You may say you have forgiven the person, but if the grievance is still there, and we can be easily triggered so easily that we become so emotionally fragile that we just crumble if someone does something similar to us today, then it shows you really haven't forgiven. You really haven't healed. You may think you have by saying this in your head. Well, I've forgiven. No, you haven't. It's still there. And so you have to get to the root cause of the problem. And so our brain has these grievance files. That's where we've filed them, and they sit there. They sit there, and they're accessed every time something similar to that file happens to us. So if someone betrays us, or at least we perceive that we're being betrayed, that goes in the betrayal file. If someone does something to us and now we've lost trust in them, that goes instantly to the trust file. And all the mistrust that happened there that's filed is ignited. So that's what's happening in our brain. So you have to realize that's what your brain will do. You have to be able that when something similar happens to us that indicates that it's accessing a grievance, you have to be able to stop that. So the first thing you have to understand is, what are your grievances? So you have to stop this process of the brain doing that and halting it and saying, wait a second, I'm being triggered. I need to stop that. That's accessing stuff from my past. That's accessing my grievance. I shouldn't react this way. This person didn't mean to do that to me, or whatever. And so therefore, you have to be able to stop it in its tracks. Well, the only way to do that is to know your grievances and know how you're being triggered, okay? So like we have said before, you can have all kinds of grievance files in your mind and your memory. You can have the fear of abandonment file. You can have I'm not loved or valued file. Or you could have I'm damaged goods. I'm the bad one of the family file. You can have this one, I fall short of the standard file. I'm rejected file. I'm helpless file. I'm alone file. I have no control file. I'm no good file. Or you can have an entitlement file. I deserve certain things. Or you can have a false identity file when you're attacked. And what I mean by that is when someone attacks you and they attack your front, your false identity that you are portraying to other people, you get angry because someone is attacking that false front. And that's where our pride comes in, when people attack that. So that's a file. Or I'm being picked on is a file. Or I'm being attacked is a file. Or I'm tired of people controlling my life file. Or I'm tired of people not protecting me file. See, these are all files that we create in our heads through grievances. And then we carry it through. And so that's the problem. And that's what we have to identify. So, like we've said before, if we find out we have a grievance story, well, there's several things we have to do, obviously. And again, these are refreshers. We got to bring truth to the situation instead of letting our perceptions rule. And bringing the truth brings us back to reality. You have to stop blaming people for how we feel. That's giving people power over us who hurt us. You can't let them have that power. So stop blaming them for how you feel today. You have to balance the personal with the impersonable. All these things we've talked about in previous episodes. You have to accept the fall in others, see them as spiritually handicapped, and understand that no one's perfect. They have a sin nature that causes them to do crazy things and sinful things and things that hurt you. You have to start down the path of forgiveness. You might not be ready to forgive, but you at least got to start down that path of saying, this is what I've got to do. You have to stop obsessing about the pain that these people caused you and about the person themselves. You have to own your part in it, take responsibility for how you reacted to it, and how you're rehabbing your way out of it. And then you have to take responsibility to process this, to process the pain, to process the healing with the truth of the Word of God. That's our rehab. And then we have to accept the grief because it is the way God gave us to process pain and loss. Grief is a gift from God. And so in order to process pain and loss, we have to accept the process of grief. And you have to go through all that process. You have to go through the depression, the anger, the shock, the bargaining, and then eventually to the acceptance of the loss. We also need to understand how our mind and memory works. That's what we talked about today, that our mind is instantly going to try to associate what's happening currently with a grievance file from the past. We have to stop that in its tracks. And so we have to understand how the mind works. And unfortunately, if we allow this to keep happening, we allow our mind to keep associating to a past grievance, what will happen to us is that it will distort reality to us. So, someone might do something to us, and we might say, "They're attacking me. They're coming after me. They're after me." And really, that's not what's happening. But the problem is, your grievance is causing so much emotion to happen in you, is that you're losing your perception of reality. And you'll say, "They're out to get me," when they're really not. They have it in for me. They're trying to cheat me. They're trying to stab me in the back, or whatever those things that come out of our emotions. You start distorting reality, and that's the problem. Most people who have grievance stories do not discern reality correctly. They are misinterpreting reality because their perceptions are messed up from their emotions. And so they're not emotionally responding the right way, and therefore they can't see things clearly. And we don't want to be in that situation. And to add to this, not only does it affect us emotionally, but it can affect our bodies, our physiology. So when someone does something to us, and then our memory, our mind goes to the grievance story, and then it goes from level 2 or 3 on a scale of 1 to 10 to level 9 and 10, well, what starts happening in our bodies is our emotions go out of whack, and our body then starts releasing stress chemicals in our body, and we start becoming physically agitated. Our heart rate will go up, our blood pressure will go up, our mood changes. We start shaking, we can get angry or frustrated, we start feeling hopeless, we start going into depression, we actually start getting paranoid. That's another hallmark of this. And basically, our emotions are causing all these stress chemicals to come out, and at that point, we've lost the thread. We have lost it. And it'll take us a while to get back to reality, but unfortunately, it's doing damage to our perception and our body. Your body just can't take that over and over again. And most people who have these grievance stories become bitter and angry and frustrated and depressed. They don't live a long time. It actually stresses the central nervous system out. And unfortunately, those who live with grievances die early. They have studied these people that have a lot of bitterness and anger towards things that happened to them in the past. They don't live a long time. It starts breaking them down physically in their bodies. So it breaks you down in your soul, it breaks you down in your emotions, breaks you down in your mind, and it breaks you down physiologically. So it's very damaging to have these things. That's why God wants us to forgive and let go of these grievance stories. So once you identify what these grievance stories are and what it is that's bothering you so bad, and where the unforgiveness is, well, another thing we have to do is get out of the isolation that these grievance stories cause us. Most people who have grievance stories tend to isolate. They tend to get away from people because it was people that hurt them. So there's a certain amount of distrust in their grievance story that affects the way they perceive people. They're standoffish. They keep their distance. They won't connect. They stay quiet. They stay behind the scenes. They don't reach out to others. And so, yeah, they go to church, they go to Bible studies, but it's really hard to connect to them. Have you noticed people around you that's very hard to connect to? They don't open up, they don't share, they don't do anything like that. It's because in their grievance story, they simply don't trust people. And so their protective mechanism is to stay isolated and stay away as much as they can. It's a very lonely place to be because they never can really connect to anybody. Even though they might be present in a church or a Bible study, they're really not connecting to anybody. And obviously, this hurts us spiritually because if you can't connect to the body of Christ with good, healthy, mature believers, then you can't really grow the best as you could if you were connected. So we got to look to connect with people, but it's not just people in general. You got to look to connect to spiritually mature believers, especially if you want out of this grievance. Because if you connect to just average Joe believer who is your peer, they don't have the ability to hold you accountable or to help you navigate through these deep waters. You have to connect to spiritually mature people who can hold you accountable and counsel you through this and correct you and admonish you and encourage you as you let go of these grievances. So you got to connect to the right people and basically people who make you productive in this, not people who allow you to sit in your grievance and you just continue to tell your story over and over again, because I can tell you what's going to happen. If you get around those types of people who are not making you or not forcing you or not holding you accountable to grow in this area, eventually they will leave you as well because they will get tired of hearing your victim mentality and get tired of you telling the story over and over again, they're just going to start pulling away from you. And that's why people with grievance stories find themselves alone many times, because they have just run out of people to tell their story to. No one wants to hear it. And so have you ever been around somebody that is a drain on you emotionally every time you talk to them? It's because of that. They just keep telling you grievance stories. So this is why grievance stories are not healthy. They actually cause you to be isolated from people. And you don't get the proper healing that you need to have by being connected to the body of Christ. So, you don't want to stay isolated. You want to connect to the right people. A couple more things I'll mention. We have to choose the truth of the story, in the story, instead of the victimization grievance story. So yes, people hurt us, life hurt us, things were taken away, things happened to us that we didn't want to happen, our life didn't go the way we wanted it to. But at the end of the day, you have to go back and reprocess that and say, what is the truth behind this? Did these people fully understand what they were doing to me? Maybe they did. Again, I'll hold that out as the exception to the rule, is yet there are people who actually try to harm us, no doubt about that. But it's a small percentage. Most of the people that hurt us have no clue how much damage they're doing to us. They don't understand. And so at that point, you have to bring in the truth. Did they fully know what they were doing? And again, this goes back to the Bible. Did the Roman soldiers who were nailing Jesus to the cross know what they were really doing? No, they did not. And that's why Messiah prays for them and says, Father, forgive them. They don't know what they're doing. That was not towards the religious leaders who knew what they were doing. That was towards the Roman soldiers actually who were crucifying him on the cross. The Roman soldiers, they had no clue that Jesus was the Messiah. They did not know he was God, that he was the God-man. And so Jesus prays for them. They don't know what they're doing. That's the principle you have to bring into your grievance story. That's bringing in the truth into the situation. And understanding that helps us then reprocess what really happened during that period of time. Or how about the truth of how much did I contribute to this? I'm I don't know, 10% to blame for this, 15% to blame. I'm just making, percentages up, but I have to own and have to admit the truth of how much I contributed to this through my own issues, right? And so that has to be weighed out. So you might end up saying, well, it was 80% them and 20% me, or something like that, or 50-50, or 60-40, I don't know. But at some point, you have to come down to the truth in order to get to that point of forgiveness and letting go of that story. Okay. Then I want to move to another thing, another principle that is going to help us let go of our grievance story. And it's this. We have to quit trying to enforce unenforceable rules. Okay? So what I mean by this is this. When people hurt us and cause us pain, we will establish rules in us. And maybe one of the rules that we will have in our head is that we want someone to pay for what they did to us. Okay, so we want compensation. We want them to admit that they were wrong. We want them to apologize. And so that becomes a rule in our head that these people who hurt us must come begging and crawling on their knees for forgiveness and compensate me for what they have done to me. Okay, something like that, okay? Again, people have different rules, but this is the general idea, if you can grasp what I'm trying to say. They'll have a rule that they want justice. And however that justice is meted out, they have their own rules for that. But their rule is, I want justice. Okay. We all want justice. That's a good thing to want justice. But again, what are we trying to do? Are we trying to enforce unenforceable rules on our own? Okay. We're not God, right? So as Christians, we hand over the justice to God because He has the power to enforce the justice. He has the authority and He has the control. What you start realizing about us as human beings, we do not possess the authority, nor do we have the power, nor do we have the control to enforce many of the rules we want on the people who hurt us. So what happens to us is when we cannot enforce the rule of, I want compensation, I want them to come and beg forgiveness for me. So we don't have the power to enforce that rule. We can't make anyone do anything. And because it's out of our control in the situation, maybe the person has passed away, maybe they live in a different side of the country or whatnot, and they're never going to ask for forgiveness. Well, we become frustrated and angry. And we become this emotional wreck because things are not going the way we want. Definitely didn't happen in the past, not happening in the future, because we know that this person, what we want from them is never going to happen. They're never going to ask for forgiveness. They're never going to beg for mercy and say, how can I compensate you? And so in those situations, we feel frustrated, angry, and then we start feeling hopeless and helpless because it can't be corrected. We can't go back and fix the past. We can't go back and correct these people. And so we feel powerless and helpless. And so that puts us in a state where we're stuck. We become stuck in the grievance. And this is where the victim mentality comes. I can't do anything about it. And so what we're really trying to do is we're trying to enforce a rule that we have in our heads, like I want you to pay or compensate me for what you did to me. I want you to ask for forgiveness. I want you to realize what you did. I want you to wake up and understand how bad you treated me. Well, all of that are rules that are unenforceable by us. And therefore, that's what causes us not to forgive. We're wanting something that these people cannot or won't give us. We're wanting something from them, but they're not going to give it to you. So we can't control others. We're powerless in that sense. We cannot make them do anything or force them to realize all of this or, force them to say sorry. And so we need to go back and look at the rules that you and I created when we were hurt. Okay? And we're going to have to realize that we created a bunch of rules that are unenforceable. And we're going to have to let those rules go. Now, those rules are in our heads, and this is what we carry through life. And they affect our feelings. There's no doubt about that. Because if we can't enforce the rules, we become frustrated and angry and hopeless and helpless. And we start to blame others for how we feel. And that we basically say, they're making us feel this way. What we have to do is get at the root cause of these rules. So what are these rules specifically? Well, let's drill down a little bit. How do we formulate these rules specifically? Well, it comes down to our expectations about God, about us, about others, and about life in general. We have expectations of how we think God should act, how others should act, how we should be treated, how life should go. Okay? These expectations. We could have idealistic expectations. We can have perfectionist expectations. And what happens when we have idealistic or perfectionist expectations of these areas, and when things don't turn out the way we want them to, like God, we prayed to God and God didn't answer my prayer, or God wasn't there for me, people will say, or I expect others to treat me better, I should be treated better, or life shouldn't be unfair, then our expectations are not met, and here's where the grievances and the rules start coming in on. We want to right the wrong. We want justice to happen. We want people to do what we want them to do. And we start saying rules like life should be fair and I'll make it fair. People should treat me good. That's a rule for a lot of people. Or people should love me. Or God should give me what I want. Good luck with that one. Or I cannot be lied to anymore. Or people's homes should be tidy and clean and not cluttered. Good luck with that one if you have kids, right? Or people should understand me. Or people should be patient with me, like my boss or my spouse. Or my vacation should be perfect. Nothing should go wrong on my vacations. And so these are just an example of some of the rules that people try to enforce, and they're just unenforceable rules. Like life should be fair. That's impossible. Life is completely unfair. But if you try to live this way with this rule, life should be fair, I can tell you how you're going to live. Frustrated and angry every day of your life. Because every day you walk out of your house, it's unfair. Something's going to happen to you. And so, when we expect people to think or behave as we want them to, that's when we're starting to put unenforceable rules on people. Or when we expect God to do things for us, or we expect the life to do certain things for us, forget it. It's not happening. You and I are not God. We lack the power to enforce these things. And we don't have control of things. And so, this is where our frustration, anger, helplessness, bitterness comes from. And the more rules you make, the more rules I make, the worse life becomes for us. So, it boils down to unrealistic expectations that turn into our rules, and these are the rules we start to live by. Okay? However, these types of rules that we create distort reality. It's not the way God is. It's not the way others are. It's not the way the world is. And so when we do this, we are willfully trying to create another reality, an alternative reality where our rules are king. But the problem is when you put that on this world and on others and on God, it doesn't work. No one will comply with those rules. Not God, not others, not reality. And this idea of we want something to happen and it doesn't is what causes these major grievances. So, to wrap things up, and we're going to continue on in how to get rid of these grievances. Do you see your expectations and do you see the rules that you've created for you and how life should go, how people should treat you, how God should treat you, how your life should be ran, that you're trying to enforce, but now you realize those things are unenforceable? Can you identify them? So it's going to be good for you to start identifying those things, to identify the unenforceable rules, because once you realize that you're doing this, you can start letting go of your grievance. You can start down the path of forgiveness. But this is where you have to start. So, that's a lot. That takes a lot of homework. And start working on that. Get a yellow pad out and just start thinking about it and writing those things down. And ask the Lord to reveal those things if you have unrealistic expectations about Him, others, and about reality and yourself. And start putting those down on paper and see them in black and white. And that will start helping you process what you're really doing and how you've created a grievance. Okay? So we'll continue this next time. God bless you. I know this is hard stuff. It gets down into the soul, but it is worth it because the truth sets you free. Always remember that. We want freedom. No matter how hard it is, we want the freedom that the truth provides. So we'll pick up on this next time. God bless you, and keep studying and learning about grievances, okay? We'll see you next time.